In a survey of several hundred people, why be afraid of dying? 7 common answers are what came up.
It's like the least fun version of Family Feud.
Yeah.
Ding.
Show me obliviation. Ding. 55 people.
How to be patient.
And welcome back to How to Be Patient, the podcast where we don't do a lot of how-to, but do a lot of yapping. And so you will have to be patient at some
about
point.
death, you know?
Yeah.
To the podcast about death. Just kidding. There's enough of those.
This is the death podcast. I was trying to be light, introducing that a little bit. But yes, so this is a topic that I think about all the time, actually. So I figured, why not use the podcast to discuss this? Well,
Why not trap us here for 4? Just kidding. I'm into this topic. So
yeah, so it's interesting. This came up to me because like some of my mentors in therapy are very interested in existential psychotherapy, which is ultimately what this is kind of all related to. So I originally wanted to actually do a single episode covering all of existential psychotherapy, and then
covering
realized
everything
that
in life.
I would need to literally talk like Busta Rhymes for 90 minutes straight to try to like scratch the surface on that. So I said, what if we broke it up into a series and talked about some of the fundamental pillars? And so this is going to be the first part in that series, talking about my 2 favorite things, existentialism and psychotherapy, and them like combining a little bit, I guess.
So your mentors have talked about this, but why are you interested in this approach?
So it's funny because I think as a college kid, I was a biochemistry major, but I always found myself attracted to like reading like existentialist authors and texts and like pondering like, why do all the things that I'm doing, and that I ended up, reading like Kierkegaard and Kafka and Camus and Plato. And I went to this like Plato book club for all of college. So I just found myself like very interested in philosophy. And I'm going to eat some of my words from prior episodes when I think I was critical of psychodynamic therapy, because I think this like, maybe it was suppression or denial or something. This like pragmatic part of me like wanted to measure something. I felt the need that like there has to be some kind of like empirical data to it. And like the frank truth that when you're dealing with those fundamental questions of existence is that you can't measure it, and you kind of have to accept that a little bit. And I always squirm around that. So anyways, when I realized that there was some therapists taking a specifically existential approach, I naturally like kind of piqued my interest, and then I wanted to learn more about it. So that's kind of how I found myself here. And I guess the reason why I'm kind of tucking my tail and saying sorry to psychodynamic about criticism I've given in the past is that existential therapy is like really fundamentally like rooted in psychodynamic therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting to hear how you like came to be interested in it, because it feels like kind of different than some of your other interests that we've like talked about on the podcast, and not like at odds with them, but just like a different sphere of your interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I give people the impression sometimes that I'm this like cold neuroscience imaging obsessed person. But I guess this is the other part of me that's coming out a little bit, the soft side. And I think that leads us into today's icebreaker, which is, it's not necessarily a question, but maybe a quote that you can reflect on. And just kind of, I want to hear your thoughts on this. So the quote goes, "Certain truths of existence are so clear and sure that logical argument or empirical research seems highly gratuitous. Put by Carl Lashley, if you teach a dog to play the violin, you don't need a string quartet to prove it."
I think that my philosophical bent is with the mystics and the romantics from my theology background. So I think the idea for me is that there is something at the core of truth in this statement. That is just known, and that it cannot be explained in the way that it's known. Like, you could try, but like in some ways you'll do a disservice to it. And I guess related to existential therapy, I think one of my experiences as both someone who has been in therapy and had like a beautiful experience with therapy and been a therapist is that there are parts of it that are ineffable and are kind of like so human and so deep that they can't be put into like a framework to submit to ACAP.
Mhm.
What do
Yes.
you think of it?
No, so what I'm hearing is that you agree with the statement that there are
Yeah, to a
things that
point.
are.
If they were like,
Mhm.
"Let's do this with vaccines," I'd be like, "Probably not." But
Yeah.
yeah. Yes, in this
I yeah,
topic,
I
yeah.
I guess I sound, yeah, I do agree, and I like the kind of tongue in cheek example at the end. If you teach a dog to play the violin, you don't need a string quartet. Like, if the absurdity is self evident that you don't need a complex explanation
Can you
or
explain
forms to try to understand it.
what that means? Because I kind of feel like I don't get that last part of it.
I think it's like if you taught a dog to play the violin, like it in itself is like it's so absurd and like clear that this is like what's happening that to convince me of it to be reality, I don't need these extra levels to the performance. I don't need to add like support cast, I guess. Is how I see it. And this isn't, I guess, a fundamental concern of existential psychotherapy, but I do think about justice with like some of these topics. So, and this comes up a lot in Plato's work. And shout out to Texas A&M who just banned Plato from their philosophy 101. Hope you guys get out of the cave soon. Anyways,
Why'd they do that?
I guess it had like gender topics in it.
Oh, okay.
And I
I
don't
mean,
remember
yeah.
the public covering a lot of that.
We're
But
going back to
anyways,
ancient texts and want them to not say things
yeah, I
about
know. I
gender.
think it's funny. Like, no matter what, Socrates is always just getting flack for poisoning minds of the youth. Like, so, that's how he goes. But like, a lot of that discussion is around uncovering justice, and it's like seeking the definition of justice that we know intuitively to be true as humans. Yet, it's so hard for us to find the right words to capture it. Nor, as you said, it's ineffable. Yet, you know it deep inside of you. You know it, and and while this kind of sounds like boundless, almost like philosophy talk, this is actually the basis of what brings us into existential psychotherapy, which is it's really the postulate that there are these truths that we know intuitively, and no matter how much we try to wrestle with them, they don't go away.
Yeah.
And and the author of this book, which is it's Existential Psychotherapy, Irvin Yalom. Shout out to this guy's
Also
awesome.
author of Letters or whatever, the gift of therapy that is a wild read if you're not familiar with analysis, but it's a
Yeah,
good book regardless.
yeah, it is. So he basically says that like these like fundamental problems of existence are kind of like the secret sauce that live under all therapies. Like whether you're doing cognitive
So,
behavioral
life
therapy or
hack.
psychodynamic therapy, that like you're always coming back to these like fundamental questions. And ultimately they are the concerns of death, being that we are all inevitably, unequivocally going to die, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And as an insightful being, we are aware of our own death, so we must we must address it in some way. The
Address
next
me.
being, yeah, address me, the elf in the room going, address me. Let's let's put
I
that on the
just sent that
screen.
meme, listeners.
Yeah,
That's what we're referencing.
we'll put it. We'll have
Jason.
Jason put it up. And then isolation. So ultimately, we are all alone. No matter how close you try to get to someone, you are still destined to your own personal private experience of the world. No one can ever experience anything for you, including death. And that's a hard concern to address.
Which is, yeah, this particular existentialist view of the truths of the world. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So these are postulates that you I guess have to accept for the purpose of like further discussion,
Mhm.
though one could argue like these postulates themselves can be like up for debate. Um, and that's probably going to go for your opinion of this next one, which is freedom. So ultimately, we all have free will, and we are all capable of making of our own decisions, and are therefore responsible for all of our own decisions. And that also torments people.
And do you think we have free will?
I don't know.
Because I feel like I'm remembering that episode with Allison Stone when we talked about free will at the end there.
Yeah, I think, I guess to step aside from this for a second, I think scientifically, it's hard for me to picture how we could possibly have free will, yet despite all of my, like, understanding of quantum mechanics and entropy and chemical reactions and everything that's governing what must be going on in my brain, I still feel as though I have a choice. And so, I mean, some people argue, like, whether or not you do have free will or not, it almost, like, doesn't matter because you still have to decide in the moment. And whether or not someone could predict it or not makes makes it almost irrelevant. But
Sorry, that
yeah,
is an
I'm not
aside.
sure. So it's like simultaneously, like, I think scientifically, I don't believe I have free will, yet I still feel like I have the ability to make a choice. So I don't know what to make of that, and that I'm still responsible for my choices. So freedom, it's still relevant to me, I guess. And what? No,
No.
I saw the eyebrows go. You have a thought.
I'm gonna hold the thought. Keep going.
Okay, and the last one is meaninglessness. So this is the concern that there is no preordained meaning to life, and that we have to find or construct our own meanings within life, and otherwise we're, like, destined to meaninglessness or despair. So ultimately, all these, like, four concerns: death, isolation, freedom, and meaninglessness, are kind of like at core is like what's addressed in existential psychotherapy, and didactically we'll talk about them all kind of individually. So this episode's primarily going to be about death, but I think the best way to think about them is almost like a coil or like a cable where they're all wrapped together
Mhm.
and they're all kind of traveling in unison at the same time.
What a
So
perfect season to be well, when we're filming this, listeners, it's early January. It's winter where I am. Mm,
yeah.
we are in the season of, like, death and quiet and silence. So what a good time, and we can I don't know, I guess I don't know what month meaninglessness is, but maybe March.
Yeah, we'll find it. Maybe July.
Maybe July.
Yeah, we have to find our own meaning. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we will dive more into how we think about death and other fun
Can't
light
wait.
topics.
So in 2026, my goal is to open a very small private practice as a post-grad psychiatrist. And one of the tools that is helping me do it is Simple Practice. Preston, have you heard of Simple Practice?
Yeah, I have heard of Simple Practice. Actually, I use it as a patient. Well, I guess my therapist technically uses Simple Practice.
And is it in fact simple?
It is very simple. It's convenient. Yeah, would recommend.
Yeah. Well, from the therapist side, Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high trust certified, and it is built specifically for therapists. So it brings scheduling, billing, insurance, and client communication into one place so that you are not juggling multiple systems just to run your practice, or if you're Preston's therapist, to see him.
I mean, I'm enough to handle as is. She doesn't need to worry about other complicated things.
And if you're just starting out or growing your practice, there's also a credentialing service that takes the headache out of insurance enrollment, which honestly can be a huge lift and something that I was a little scared of.
So if you're ready to start the business side of your practice, now is the perfect time to try Simple Practice. Do it with us. Well, I guess me in the future and Margaret now. So start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. That's simplepractice.com.
You're back with the Grim Reaper podcast.
Oh yeah, welcome. So I wanted to start out this section with a quote from Mark Twain that goes, "The fear of death follows the fear of life. A man who lives life fully is prepared to die at any time." And I think I always find myself like wondering about like the ways in which like life and death are like intertwined, I guess, or like this concept that life has less meaning if death doesn't exist. Do you agree with that statement?
I don't know. In theory, probably yes. I think what I'm struck by in talking about this is like, and our listeners know, I come from a background of therapy that looks at like feminist power dynamic intersectional therapy. And so I don't know, this idea of living, it feels to me that, like, this connection between life and death and, like, risk in life is for a lot of human history was part of more of day-to-day life in a lot of different societies, and in particular
Mhm.
for, like, women who would die a lot in, like, childbirth. And so it's interesting. I'm trying to pick up the thread of your question of this, like, life and death as contrasts, and would life be as meaningful if there wasn't death? And it's hard for me to separate them out from each other as being separate things.
So you're saying that they're so intertwined you can't even separate them.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, I guess that would be because it kind of what like I guess the reason I bring that up is that there are some people that would push back on this conversation against death because death is not often brought up in like psychotherapy spaces unless the patient is directly confronting death or in some kind
Interesting
of
that you
way.
say that.
Um, and I don't know, maybe I don't bring it up a lot. And then, and the author talks a lot about how often like death isn't brought up. So I'm kind of agreeing with him there. And maybe I'll talk about death more frequently as I progress in therapy or make a point to. But there are some that would respond by saying, "Don't scratch where it doesn't itch." This patient is coming into my office. They want to talk to me about their problems of life. They are concerned about living. So why bring up death? Why even do any of that in the first place? And so that kind of leads into the Mark Twain quote of like, well, to live fully is to be prepared to die. And kind of what you're saying is that life and death are so intertwined
Yeah,
that you can't separate the two. If you want to talk about life, you have to talk about death.
yeah. Well, and I think his quote reminds me of something that's, like, popular and has been popular for a long time, but you see, like, on social media. But this idea of, like, what does it mean to, like, live your life to the fullest? And often it's, like, splashy, or it's, like, about not working or not having da 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 da, and it's about, like, these, like, peak moments in relationships. And so I think that kind of quote, I feel like the context I see it in is like, "Okay, but how?" With this kind of sorry, I'm not being linear enough to your sorry, I'm recognizing as I respond to them, not being, directly responding to what you're saying. Um, I just find this quote is, like, setting me off for some reason in, like, a good way.
Yeah, and like it's an important question to have, and like, and the but how is like the rest of an 1,000-page book.
Yeah.
Is like, and honestly, the but how is probably the entire purpose of philosophy. I think I don't know the person who said this, but the someone once said that like the entire art of philosophy is learning how to prepare to die. So like Mark Twain says, to live prepared to die is to live fully, and to live prepared to die is to like master philosophy. I guess like the philosophy is like the pursuit of like preparing for death in that
Hmm.
way. So yeah, it's much easier said than done.
Do you think that what do you think? Like, with this, like, separation of life and death, like, a good life, like, what do you make of that quote yourself?
I guess I agree with it. Um, and I'm gonna like kind of push forward to this next quote that I think like supports it and kind of helps explain why I agree with it. That um, I think in general, to enjoy something more fully, you have to accept the absence of it. So let's take relationships for example. I think like I am more stable in a relationship if I can accept that like we were to break up or something and not be together. Like if you can accept the concept of you not being together, it can help you being together more fully. Because if you cannot accept the idea of not being together, then that if that's a non-option to you in the sense that like that is the worst thing that could happen, it's catastrophic, it generates a ton of anxiety in you, then that anxiety about the possibility of breaking up actually starts to make the
Mhm.
relationship
Like,
worse.
distort things, yeah.
And the same goes for like things like your job, like if you can't accept being fired from your job, then almost your job will probably become worse. And you're more likely to let yourself be taken advantage of, and you're going to be more stressed about constantly trying to lose your job.
Right.
And I think, if you were like zoom out, the same thing applies to life. It's if you're always afraid of dying, it can be harder to like enjoy the parts of life that you do have. And that's not to say that like, being willing to accept like losing your job means you're going to go out of your way to try to get fired, just like how being prepared to die means you're going to go do cavalier stuff and backflips off of like helicopters flying through the Alps and, put yourself at great risk of dying. But it does mean that you can like enjoy those moments a lot better without like the constant fear, dread of what's happening. I think that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah.
And so I guess like to tie in that the kind of almost irony there that death brings us life. There's a quote from the book that although the physicality of death destroys man, the idea of death is what saves him. And I guess like as such, like insight into your awareness of death is what spurs you into a good life.
Yeah. That's interesting. I feel like I've talked about this in the podcast, but I feel like who I was as a person before my dad got sick, and honestly, before going through like clinical years in med school and in the hospital, it's hard to imagine not being super aware of death for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, literally, anytime and it reminds me also somewhat of our episode talking about like caregiver PTSD, which I do not have, but like, I was talking to my parents the other day and I was like, when is the next MRI? Because my dad gets an MRI every quarter. And they're like, oh, it's actually tomorrow, like tomorrow for me right now listening. And so in thinking about this episode and in thinking about like this quote that you just shared, it's hard for me. Like, I guess I'm pushing a little bit against not your idea, but this idea that it's like, are people not thinking about death? And I feel like the public consciousness of death after COVID is so present.
I guess I would say, yeah, people are not thinking about death.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. What makes you say that? I don't disagree with you, but I'm just curious what makes you say that.
I mean, I think the entire
I'm like ruining Preston's episode, you guys. I'm sorry.
it's like the entire impetus of our society is kind of like hiding death in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of, at least in America and Western society, we have these hedonistic views where we see life as something where we try to maximize our pleasure and maximize the number of pleasurable experiences we have. And in that sense, death must be the cessation of all pleasurable experiences. And if life's greatest good is pleasure and how much I can maximize it, then life's greatest evil must be the absence of all those things. And so I think when we do think about death, we try to hide it in every single way. We try to hide the ways that we age. When our family members do age, we tuck them away in nursing homes where we don't have to look at them. And we like don't stare it in the face in almost any way. And I think there are other cultures that have, I think, a healthier relationship with death. And I kind of see that intertwined here in San Antonio. So like Latino culture does, like they have like the Day of the Dead, for example. And like it was kind of interesting for me to see the relationship that like this city has with death and the way they celebrate it, which is I don't think is very common in a lot of other, I think, like Western driven like American cities.
There's kind of like a marked absence, though, in how you're talking of like consideration of like the function of religion. And like whether you agree with religion or not, but like the Day of the Dead is also, it's a Latino religion component, but it's also like a Christian Catholic component. So I feel like that's part of also why I'm kind of like, is this sweeping kind of statement that people don't think. I agree with the core thing that we like push aside aging, especially we push aside like ourselves getting ill and really entering towards death. And so I do think the core of it, I agree with you that like the actual thing of starting to move towards dying as we really age is hidden and avoided.
Mhm. Yeah, I think like people like through religion, I think acknowledge the existence of death, but this is their own personal death and what they are going to be dealing with. And I think that is like what a lot of people deny or try to skirt around or try to or displace that anxiety onto other things. So um like for example, the the ways in which people like fear death may not be actually of like death itself, but things that are translated onto it. So the thought of like being forgotten by another person, ultimately that's a fear of like ceasing to exist or dying. But it's like about like what if they forget about me, or what if I lose this, like what if I lose my function, or like my cognitive function, what if I lose my ability to do those things. Those are all like fears of ceasing to exist. But the person, when they're fearing that and they're thinking about that all day, they're not thinking about, I'm going to die someday, this is my mortality. It's translated onto that one specific thing, I guess. So what I'm saying is that like when people have these like conscious fears, it is like unconscious, often like death anxiety that gets translated onto other things. And that what the hope is here is to try to make that death anxiety more conscious so that it can be better accepted.
Got it.
And that's actually, and it sounds like you, from like your personal experience as you're describing it, you have a lot of like conscious interaction with mortality and death and your own mortality in a way that maybe other people don't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually know that I would say other people don't. Like, I would say a lot of the women I talk to who are mothers think about their kids dying every single day, and they're, like, more terrified of that. I mean, granted, I see anxious but even outside of that, like, I guess and we can move on from this, but I guess I question this statement that some of this is based on after and I did not question this statement actually when I, like, first started, like, learning about it a little bit at the end of med school. But now that I've actually, like, worked with people, I just I just wonder and, like, also just working with people who aren't in academics and, like, are living all sorts of different lives. In real time on this podcast, I guess I'm questioning my own basis of believing this theory, but that's neither here nor there. I'll question that in my own therapy. But yes, my personal experience is such that I think about it quite often. And also working in a hospital, working with sick people on like consults and stuff like that. Like, and then in my family situation, like I think I do think about it probably more than the average person, yes.
Yeah, and I guess like in your consult services, how much time is being spent trying to like avoid the discussion or the possibility that like someone is going to die? Like, you know, I think like
Yeah.
I think we're maybe kind of like intersecting on the same idea, but like from different directions. So I guess like when I'm saying that like people don't like to think about death, is that they don't like to think about like confronting death, and that like people are aware that they're going to die, but like they're terrified that like it's
Mhm.
ever going to come for them, and they do everything they can to try to like run away from it and
And
avoid
then the
it in
dynamics
every
play out in
possible
the
way.
teams, and the teams play it out that way of like running around when they're like refusing to do a palliative care consult when it's clearly indicated.
Exactly. Like the thought of like patients getting, or patient family members, or even like primary teams being like distraught or like caught off guard by the thought of a goals of care discussion, that the resistance to that, that's them not wanting to talk about death. So it's not that they're like not aware that people don't die. It's that, okay, like, you know, that it's confronting that like you are going to die. And
Mhm.
that's why palliative care needs to come in and talk to you about goals of care. That's what you have to accept. The concept of like coming into like near death experiences
Mm.
can have like almost like a paradoxical like positive view, or this, I guess, as we're saying, like this is what's argued in the book and we can have our own opinions about it, but I did find this statistic kind of interesting. So this guy Russell Noyles, he studied patients with near-death experiences. It was like a cohort of 200 individuals, and he kind of like did qualitative research asking them about how they felt about their life before or after the accident. So these like 200 individuals, this cohort, from a variety of like snowboarding accidents to rock climbing, you know, cancer, like they all had like some sort of like near death experience. And then when he kind of asked them about like how they felt after death, 23% of them, so about a quarter of people, actually reported having a much better relationship with life after their accident, and that they had more moments of serenity, a higher and better awareness of the preciousness of life, and a deeper drive to savor and enjoy moments in front of them. And like I think that's something we also know intuitively, that like everyone talks about how like they had that one, or like someone in a movie talks about they had that one near-death experience and how they just enjoy every moment the same way. And it's just strange to think that like this brush with death in a way like improved the rest of their life. And like that,
It's like the ultimate
like what I'm saying,
exposure therapy.
yeah, it's like that confrontation that they spent so much time trying to avoid ended up having this kind of like positive reaction. And that's in a fourth of people. In another fourth of them, it actually elevated their death anxiety. And in the rest of them, it didn't really make a difference in how they felt about things.
Hmm.
So some people have this like profound positive response to it. Um, and I guess like, accept or not that, people are afraid to confront death or don't want to think about or talk about death. I think the next thing we have to think about is, if someone is afraid to confront death, what are they actually afraid of when they think of dying?
Hmm.
Like, why be afraid of death?
I mean, I think some of it is the like it turning into nothing and ceasing to exist and not mattering, whatever mattering means to someone. Um, I think the fear of obliviation is also probably something deep in us, or at least the analysts would probably say that. Uh,
What do you mean by that? Obliviation?
just the fear of becoming a total, literal nothing in the universe, and your kind of being glued together, coming undone, and never mattering ever again, almost as if you could have just never existed. And then I think in a less analytic-y, dynamic-y voice, I would say, like, I think there's also worries depending on what part of the life cycle you're in of like, did I get to do this, this, and this thing? Did I get to have the life that I thought I wanted? Um, at other points, I think it's like very really like, I don't want to leave behind these people who still need me. Like, I don't, yeah. Like, I think that's a huge one.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think you hit all the beats that I was probably going to
The death
address.
beats.
All the reasons
Death
why I'm scared. So,
knolls.
um, in a survey of several hundred people that asked that direct question, why be afraid of dying? 7 common answers are what came up, and
It's like the
the first
least
one
fun
was,
version of Family Feud. Like,
yeah,
ding.
show me,
Show me.
show me obliviation, ding, 55 people. But actually, so number one was, my death would cause grief to those who love me. And then next was, all my plans would come to an end.
Wait, but the fact that, like, isn't that so the first one being like, isn't that so like, it makes me wanna, like, tear up that the first one is that, like, I
It
can't
would
leave
hurt
because, like,
other
the people
people.
who love me would
Hmm. Um, the next one is, the process of dying itself may be painful or might hurt to die. Next is, I could no longer have experiences or enjoy things. So ceasing to exist, I guess. Um, Next one is, those who I care for would lose support. This is a common one I also come across, that, they have dependents and people that they're responsible to. So what's going to become of them? The next one is, I'm afraid of what might happen next. And I'm afraid of what will become of my body. And so ultimately, those, you really, I guess, address like the three things that it are kind of three common themes that come out of that, which are the unknown, or what comes next, that fear, whether in life or outside of life, like what comes next for the people that I'm leaving behind, what's coming next for me, the event itself,
Mm.
and the idea of ceasing to be. Those are like the three things that scare us the most about death.
Mhm.
And it's weird because when I say it out loud to myself, I'm like, ceasing to be sounds scary, but like death sounds scarier to me. But then when I try to break down my fear of death into its component parts, each one of them feels less scary, I guess.
Hmm.
It's almost like the fear is built to be greater than the sum of its parts in a way.
Yeah. Like, it's like the, like, 3 little aliens in the trench coat in Space Jam.
Yeah.
Exactly like
Yeah. The trench coat coming to take you away. So so essentially, like,
It's
in summary of this part, we are all going to die,
sum up
and
death.
we are intimately aware that we are going to die, yet we are afraid to confront our fear of death. And then it's for like these kind of several reasons. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about, I guess, like some of the ways that we try to cope with those fears. And we are back to talk about the ways that we fight death, the unwinnable battle that we're all facing.
In
So,
Preston's view. In the existentialist view.
in the existentialist view, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, essentially, the existentialists, and I guess I shouldn't, I need to like check myself here because I am kind of like saying out some of this stuff like it is gospel and it's not gospel.
Mhm.
It's a book that and a style of thinking that I'm going through and I'm kind of like regurgitating essentially. But what they do in essence say is that like when we have this fear of death, that we kind of approach it with like several of like the denial based strategies, so to speak. So, and then like that's kind of like how we translate our fear of death onto other things. So, like things like repression, projection, suppression, like those are all like really functionally like our denial based strategies. In that, if you do them in, so to speak, like unhealthy ways, the existentialists would argue that that's like the source of psychopathology, and that like the confrontation and the acceptance of death is like the healthy thing.
Mhm.
And we'll like get at these when we like look at some of the other episodes, but or like kind of some of the other aspects of existential psychotherapy. But like ultimately each of these like pillars has like a confrontation and then like a challenge, and then it has like some barrier you have to overcome to accept it. So like the challenge is like you're going to die. We squirm about it by trying to kind of translate that fear of death onto something else, but then ultimately we have to come around to confront it in order to like live holistically.
Mhm.
And I guess like reading about that makes me think about like what are like some of the ways that like me, I guess, like would translate my own like fear of death onto like other things, and like what I guess what comes to mind for you when or maybe it doesn't translate onto other things.
I mean, I feel like I think for me there's an element of thinking about, like, what kind of, like, life and values do I wanna live by, and maybe avoid thinking about death, or I guess, like, try to, like, sublimate it kind of into, like, do I feel like I'm being helpful, like, to my patients? Do I feel like I'm being, like, a caring, like, daughter and friend and person like that? And in a way that can be a type of, like, avoidance. Like, a sublimation can go so far when it becomes rigid that it becomes an avoidance of death, like, as a way to cope.
Hmm.
What about you?
So, this is like I guess one that like the book talked about, or that Irvin Yalom talks about, that kind of resonates with me, and I think I catch myself doing it. Is it's the idea that you can shirk death or deny death by finding other ways to become immortal. So I think a lot of people approach this that if I can generate something that people will always care about me writing about, in a way, I'll never truly die. Like then I
Mm,
can kind
yeah.
of convince myself in some way that I will become immortal.
Mhm.
Not physically, like I'm aware that my body will physically die, but my children will remember me.
Mm,
I'll be remembered for my work, my legacy, or X, Y, and Z. And I think it's kind of interesting too that like even in like Erickson stages, for example, this becomes like a primary like preoccupation or fear of people like as they start to like approach death, and then things become like more legacy like motivated. So like
yeah.
those are like still in a way like not confronting that initial fear we talked about before the break of ceasing to be, right? Because if I'm ultimately afraid of ceasing to be, yet I'm determined to cope with that by generating my legacy, like I'm running from that, if that kind of makes sense. Or I guess that's like, I guess I agree with that argument.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a way in which, like, that can be healthy?
I
Like,
guess.
is there, like, because part of me thinks, like, that's, like, a positive way somewhat to deal with it, but, is it to quote the internet, is it always a cope? Or is, like, at what point is it just, like, functional behavior versus, like, coping to the existentialists?
Mhm. I guess, I kind of agree with you. Or actually, I don't mean kind of. I do agree with you that there are healthy things about building a legacy, or that even maybe building a legacy in of itself might be healthy. Hi, Lilac. Um, I guess like the existentialists would argue that you are still not letting yourself live life fully and like, I guess, clear eyes, wide open, if you're trying to shirk or not confront the things that
Mm.
scare you about death. So I I'm sure there's like a both and in there where you can build a legacy, but also have easily come to terms with that you will cease to be, and at some point your legacy in of itself will also cease to be, and like like everyone who's ever lived that might remember your name might also die someday, and so will everyone who's ever read your book, and so like at that point, you know you'll completely disappear from the universe. Well, what happens then? Is that okay with you? Like, oh yeah, it's fine. Like I just want to help for like the next generation or something else. But maybe some people are like, no, well, like, I'll find a way, like, and then the next civilization will come back and they'll discover me and I'll live again. Like I think that's kind of the nuance between that. Because there's obviously positives in building like lasting work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like also you hear people talk about this with, like, a legacy just of, like, "Oh, like, my family and my children or whatever, like, my family
Hmm.
home will be," or the, like, even sometimes, like, not hoarding, but, like, people who can't, like, won't look at the fact as they get older that, like, maybe they need to, like, downsize or, like, there's a lot of things in their house that, like, they're not gonna ever use again in their lifetime, and kind of this idea of, like, "Well, no, these things are gonna matter after me." That's probably also combined with, like, a little bit of a different way of coping, but which is maybe denial, which
Yeah.
another one, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, like denial it's incredibly powerful and really effective. And I guess it took me to PGY3 of psychiatry residency to like I think appreciate denial for what it is, just like an S tier defense. And it was funny because I think I would always get upset or irked in like my friends when they like showed evidence of denial. I'm like, come on, like like confront the issue head on. Like I try to confront my issues head on, but like obviously I don't. Like that's probably why denial irks me so much because there's like my own things that I'm denying, and like it's it's ubiquitous, and I think ultimately, like when people are thinking about your like the ego defenses that people put up against like the threat of death, they all kind of start pointing their way back to denial. Like and these are all like when you say like, oh, maybe they're copes, maybe they're not. They're different ways of kind of denying those like three primary fears. Like my body will deteriorate, but I won't cease to be because I'll have a legacy, right? Or like if I do die, it's going to be peacefully in my sleep and I won't even feel anything, and therefore the event won't be bad at all. Or if I do die, like there must be an afterlife, and I have faith in that afterlife, and therefore there's no unknown that I have to confront or be afraid of. So while I also don't necessarily agree with like all of these propositions put forward, those would be in and of themselves like ways to deny the like existential fears of death, or like avoid them rather than confronting them. And I guess like I come across all three of those fears in like different places. I mean, it's obvious like people fear the event, and we see that in the hospital a lot. Is there a way like or like of those three fears or like the three kind of like subsets of a fear of death, like what do you see coming up in patients?
I mean, I think it's hard for me to say with kids because some of the kids I'm seeing are dying. Um, but it depends, I think, developmentally for people to be able to understand, or I'm seeing kids and their parents are dying. Um, I think with adults, I think there can be an avoidance of it, an avoidance of the emotions around it, in kind of sinking into like, let me just go into this cognitive logistical mode around like if I'm ill, whether that's like I'm terminally and acutely ill, or it's like I have an illness that like limits me over the next 30 years of my
Mhm.
life. And so it can kind of be like, well, let's just focus on, having this perfect routine and doing these things and like almost like pushing off the feeling of the worry, but also the, like, pre-grief of death. So I feel like that is one I would see quite a bit. Um, and then I think it's interesting to think about working with, like, adolescents and young adults who were being raised around the time of COVID and developing during COVID and in this current, like, political slash, like, economic time point where sometimes, like, the word failure to launch is thrown around glibly, but I actually feel like it's also kind of like a death shadow where it's like they're worried at the beginning that their life is never gonna be what they want it to be or matter enough anyway, so why try? Like, why live? Um, and so it's almost like a defensiveness of life, but I think that's, like, part of this death thing. Like, I won't confront the fact that my life will end by just saying, like, "My life will never matter anyway, and my life will never be good." So, like, why even kind of start it?
Yeah, it's it it's interesting that, like, suicide or, like, suicidal ideation is also often running from something.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, it's not usually conceptualized as running towards death, but rather running away from life.
Mhm.
So maybe, I guess, like, the core of this is that, like, or maybe to sound like too simple as I'm like paraphrasing existential thought, but that like confrontation is the goal, and that like avoidance is like what will lead to more psychopathology
Mm.
ultimately.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and it's hard to do. Like I struggle a lot with like helping my patients like confront things, and I don't know if I've ever like frankly brought this up to a patient, where essentially I guess you would just say like, "Are you afraid to die?"
Yeah, I think that's probably good that you that way.
Why would it be bad? I guess and then it might be bad, honestly. I'm just kinda thinking openly. Like, and this isn't like in a hospice situation where, like, someone's actually gonna die, like, like a 30-year-old client who's, like, coming in, like, just discussing, like, might seem like average things, like, what like, "Tell me about your thoughts about death." Like, does it aff does it cause you fear?
Well, I think it's just like, a little, like, on the nose. Like, I think it would be like someone coming in and being like, "It's our 2nd session," and you maybe have a hypothesis that they're really coming in because they've, like, been in an abusive relationship or something, or, like, an abusive family situation, and then you say, like, "Why do you let your family treat you that way?" Or, like, "Your family's obviously abusing you, what are you gonna do about it?" Like, it's just, like, a little bit too confronting to be metabolized and digested. Like,
Mm,
I think that we can talk about death, and certainly sometimes that means, like often actually, I feel like it means getting to actually talk about death and grief and something that people are either afraid of or have already experienced. But I do think the, like, avoidance isn't necessarily overcome by forcing the door, like, wide open. Like, you don't take someone who's suffering with agoraphobia and be like, "We're going to the mall today.
mhm.
Appointment 1."
Yeah,
Like, it's just yeah.
and if denial is your primary mode of coping, then, like, that's the worst way to go about it.
Yeah, well, and you always have to ask, I mean, what often we talk about in dynamics is, like, defenses exist for a reason, right? Like, they're functioning, they're doing something for people. So if you just, like, rip the defense away, then you kind of are, like, blowing over a house of cards sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah, like, the defenses are there for a reason. The other part of that coin, that, Yalom argues is that when the therapist doesn't bring up death and the patient doesn't bring up death, both of your like avoidance of the topic starts to collude together, and then you just never discuss death. And that was like ultimately like one of his like main criticisms of Freud is like Freud's like deliberate inattention to death in like many of his writings, and relating them ultimately to a lot of like childhood anxieties. But then like I guess Yalom would argue that underneath those childhood anxieties is the primordial fear of death that he was like shirking or avoiding talking about. So I guess as we kind of wrap up right now, we don't have any good solutions to this problem
We're
that
gonna
we're
solve
all
it,
going
you
to die. I think we
guys.
can talk a lot about like the things that make us afraid and how we translate it, and just the thought of bringing it up to patients. But we appreciate you kind of joining, I guess, me on my pet project in this series, and then the next one we'll kind of continue with the other like concerns of existentialism. So I just want to say thank you so much for listening. I know some of you guys have been leaving some voice notes, and somebody left us one in response to all of the like the food episodes that we did about like the frustration of dealing with like yogurt and macros, and how when you try to eat right and help your body, it turns you into a gym bro a little bit. And I kind of feel you there. It can be hard to strike the balance between gym bro and whimsically enjoying food and also eating for your mental health.
True.
I do check out the Patreon. I included a cooking video. I'll try to make like a non-gym bro yogurt video for you guys as well, or something there. But otherwise, like if you like the existential stuff, we want to hear about it. If you don't like the religion philosophy discussion, also want to hear about it. But you can always let us know on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. You can also contact the team directly at howtobepatientpod.com. You can see more of me at It's Presro or Presro on TikTok, wherever you scroll on your reels. And you can always find Margaret at Bad Art Every Day. She's on Substack and TikTok and Instagram. Full episodes are on Spotify and YouTube on video, but honestly, anywhere you get your podcast, you can just hear us yap in your ears, in your car or on your long run or in the gym. Thanks again for listening. We're your hosts, Preston Roche and Margaret Duncan. Our executive producers are me, Preston Roche, Margaret Duncan, Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Jason Bartizo. Our music is by Omer Benz V. To learn more about our program disclaimer and ethics policy, submission verification and licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to howtobepatientpod.com or reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. How to Be Patient is a human content production. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.